Thank you for coming back. This is Komi Gyamfi. Before we got into the actual lecture series, we wanted to talk to you about a few preconditions for learning. The number one precondition for learning is the understanding that all human life began in Africa. It's undisputable DNA evidence, which has been the Africans' best tool as of late, proves that all life began in Africa. It was formerly believed that life began in the Mediterranean. At least that was a narrative that was being spread. But now we firmly believe and understand that all life began in Africa. So that when we have these conversations, we understand that Kemet and Kush are the beginnings of civilization. They are in Africa, which means that the first pharaohs of Kemet and Kush, first kings and queens, were African. Those civilizations that sprouted religion and science and agriculture and all these other things were of African birth. The second precondition for learning is the understanding that all points of view are done through an Afrocentric worldview perspective, meaning that the research and the information that's given to you is done seen through an Afrocentric lens, a lens through Africans and their descendants. Now, what we had to do was we had to do as much in-depth research as we can, and there are many Afrocentric scholars out there that have provided us with source material. So, what is an Afrocentric worldview perspective? Well, it begins with the idea that Ubuntu, or the spirit of cooperation, or I am because of we, or who am I without us? This idea that the community comes first. So everything that we talk about and write about uh, leans towards that spirit of cooperation and that idea that it's not just me, this is about all of us. Secondly, the Afrocentric worldview expresses the idea that it's man and nature, not man versus nature, but man is a part of nature. So that when we talk about pushing through, we don't push through nature. We try to make adjustments and we try to incorporate our lives into what nature is doing, into the world around us. We don't want to change that environment around us because we don't own it. We are only using it. Our generations, ancestors and descendants are only using the earth. There are no boundaries in the Afrocentric worldview. So that is important to understand when we have these discussions. Another aspect of the Afrocentric worldview is the understanding that there is no separation between the physical and spiritual worlds. So, yes, I can touch, I can see everything around me, but there is also a spiritual element that guides and holds everything together. And science can't explain it. So when we talk about these elements and creating life, you still have to include that spiritual element when you talk about all of these things. That is an Afrocentric worldview. Another precondition for learning is we will not argue faith, meaning in Africa, where we know life began and we know it was the beginning of civilization, then we also know that was the beginning of religion. And all religions thereafter can find their roots some ways philosophically in Africa. So we're not going to argue or dispute whether one religion is better or whether one's faith is better than the other, because faith is what pushes people on a daily basis. And we cannot argue faith. Faith is important to have. We'll never have that discussion. Our discussions will be historical in nature. We will use historical references, uh, and we will try to use as many untainted historical references as we possibly can. We will try to use historians that wrote at the time that we speak of, and we will not just use their words. We'll try to decipher the agenda that's behind much of what they say. So remember, we'll never have arguments over religion. If you do want to have arguments over religion, this is not the page for you. Another precondition for learning is we will not argue the existence of systematic racism. Listen, I have 6,000 ancestors that came before me in order for me to be here. 6,000 that had to go through all kind of struggles. I'm not going to argue the idea that they had to go through these struggles or the idea that systematic racism doesn't exist. I know it exists, you know it exists. If you want to have those arguments, this is not the page for you. This video was brought to you by Udafo LLC.